The rain hammered against the windows of the sprawling Montana ranch house like bullets from an angry sky. Marcus Wellington stood in his study, watching lightning split the darkness beyond the glass. At 62, he had seen plenty of storms, but this one felt different, meaner. The kind that reminded a man how small he really was, no matter how many acres he owned or how many zeros filled his bank account. Thunder rolled across the valley, shaking the house down to its stone foundation. Marcus took a sip of his whiskey, the amber liquid burning warm down his throat. He had built this empire from nothing, turning a failed cattle ranch into one of the most successful operations in 3 states. People called him ruthless. They weren't wrong. In business, kindness was a luxury he couldn't afford. The doorbell rang. Marcus frowned. Nobody visited the Wellington ranch after dark, especially not in weather like this. The nearest neighbor lived 15 miles away, and his security team wouldn't use the front door. He glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner, nearly midnight. The bell rang again, followed by what sounded like weak knocking. Marcus set down his glass and walked through the dimly lit hallway. His boots echoed on the hardwood floors, a sound that usually reminded him of his power and success. Tonight, it just sounded lonely. The house was too big for one person, but he had never minded the emptiness before. It meant no one could disappoint him. No one could leave. He reached the heavy oak door and paused. Through the frosted glass, he could make out a small figure hunched against the storm. Marcus kept a shotgun by the front door, but something about the shadow made him hesitate. It was too small to be a threat, too fragile. He opened the door. A child stood on his porch, soaked to the bone and shivering violently. The boy couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old, with dark hair plastered to his head and clothes that hung like wet rags on his tiny frame. His face was pale as moonlight, and his lips had turned an alarming shade of blue. "Please, mister," the child whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm. "I'm unwell, my legs won't hold me. May I stay until morning?" Marcus stared at the boy, his mind racing. Where had this child come from? The nearest town was 20 miles away, and no kid could have walked that far in this weather. There were no broken-down cars on the road leading to his ranch. No tire tracks in the mud except from his own vehicles. The boy swayed on his feet, and Marcus realized the child was about to collapse. Without thinking, he reached out and caught the small body before it hit the porch. The boy weighed almost nothing, like he was made of air and bones. His skin felt ice cold, even through his wet clothes. "Jesus," Marcus muttered. He had never been good with children, had never wanted any of his own. But he couldn't leave a sick kid standing in a storm that could kill a grown man. He carried the boy inside, kicking the door shut behind him. The child's head rolled against his shoulder, consciousness fading in and out. Marcus could feel the boy's heart beating like a frightened bird's wings against his chest. "What's your name, son?" Marcus asked as he carried the child toward the living room. "Tommy," the boy whispered, "Tommy Hensley." Marcus had lived in this valley for 30 years. He knew every family for 50 miles in any direction. He had never heard of any Hensleys, but questions could wait. Right now, the boy needed warmth and dry clothes. He set Tommy down gently on the leather couch in front of the massive stone fireplace. The boy's eyes fluttered open, revealing the brightest blue Marcus had ever seen. They reminded him of something, but he couldn't place what. "You're safe now," Marcus said, surprised by the gentleness in his own voice. "Let's get you warmed up." He grabbed some towels from the bathroom and helped Tommy out of his soaked clothes. The boy's body was covered in bruises, old and new ones layered like a map of pain. Some were yellow and fatting. Others were purple and fresh. Marcus felt something cold and hard settle in his stomach. "Who did this to you?" he asked quietly. Tommy's eyes darted away. "I fell down a lot, I'm clumsy." Marcus had heard enough lies in his lifetime to recognize another one. But he didn't push. Not yet. Instead, he wrapped the boy in warm blankets and built up the fire until flames danced high in the hearth. Tommy's shivering gradually stopped, and some color returned to his cheeks. "Are you hungry?" Marcus asked. The boy nodded eagerly, and Marcus realized he probably hadn't eaten in days. He went to the kitchen and heated up some soup, buttered thick slices of bread, and poured a tall glass of milk. When he returned, Tommy devoured the food like he hadn't seen a meal in weeks. "Slow down," Marcus said gently. "There's plenty more where that came from." As the boy ate, Marcus studied his face. There was something familiar about those features, something that tugged at memories he had buried deep. The shape of the nose, the stubborn set of the jaw, the way Tommy held his head when he was thinking. "Where are your parents, Tommy?" Marcus asked. The boy's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. "My mama's gone, has been for a long time." "And your father?" Tommy's face went dark. "He doesn't want me anymore, says I'm too much trouble, too expensive." The boy's voice broke on the last word. "He left me at a place, but I ran away, been walking for days." Marcus felt that cold weight in his stomach grow heavier. "What kind of place?" "A home for kids nobody wants." Tommy wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "They said I'd probably stay there till I was 18, maybe longer if nobody ever picked me." The pieces started falling into place in Marcus's mind, forming a picture he didn't want to see. An unwanted child, bruises that spoke of abuse, a father who had given up on his own son. "What's your father's name?" Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. Tommy looked up at him with those impossibly blue eyes. "Robert Hensley, but everybody calls him Bobby." The glass slipped from Marcus's hand and shattered on the hardwood floor. Milk spread across the boards like spilled moonlight, but he barely noticed. His mind was spinning backward through time, to a young woman with the same blue eyes who had worked in his house 25 years ago. Sarah Hensley, beautiful, kind Sarah who had cleaned his home and cooked his meals and slowly, carefully, stolen his heart. Sarah who had left without explanation one night, taking with her the only chance at happiness Marcus had ever known. Sarah who had married a man named Bobby Hensley just 6 months later. Marcus had convinced himself she had never loved him, that their brief time together had meant nothing to her. He had built walls around his heart so high that nothing could climb over them. He had made himself hard and cold and successful because success was easier than heartbreak. But looking at Tommy now, at those familiar blue eyes and that stubborn chin, Marcus saw something that changed everything. He saw Sarah's face reflected in features that were unmistakably his own. "Tommy," he said carefully, "when's your birthday?" "March 15th, Tommy replied. "I'll be 9 next month." Marcus did the math in his head, counting backward to a spring night 26 years ago when Sarah had come to his room with tears in her eyes and love in her heart. 9 months later, she had given birth to a son she had raised as another man's child. Thunder crashed outside, but Marcus barely heard it. His world had just shifted on its axis, and he was struggling to find his balance. This boy, this bruised and frightened child who had appeared on his doorstep like a ghost from the past, was his son, his blood, his responsibility. And tomorrow, he would have to decide what to do about it. Tommy yawned, exhaustion finally overtaking him. His eyelids drooped as the warmth of the fire and the food in his belly made him sleepy. Marcus watched the boy fight against sleep, probably afraid that if he closed his eyes, he would wake up back in that cold place where nobody wanted him. "Rest now," Marcus said softly. "You're safe here." Tommy's eyes fluttered shut, and within minutes he was breathing deeply. Marcus sat in his chair, watching the boy sleep and trying to process what he had learned. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside, by the warm glow of the fire, something was changing. Something that had been frozen solid for 25 years was beginning to thaw. Marcus had spent his adult life convinced that he was better off alone. That love was a weakness he couldn't afford. That family was just another word for disappointment and pain. But looking at Tommy sleeping peacefully on his couch, wrapped in blankets and finally safe from whatever horrors had driven him into the storm, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he might have been wrong about everything. The boy stirred in his sleep, and Marcus saw Sarah's face in his peaceful expression. Sarah, who had loved him enough to protect their son by giving him another man's name. Sarah, who had sacrificed her own happiness to keep their child safe from the scandal that would have destroyed them both in a small town where secrets were currency and reputation was everything. Marcus reached out and gently brushed a strand of dark hair from Tommy's forehead. The boy was warm now, his breathing steady and strong. For the first time in 25 years, the big house didn't feel quite so empty. Outside, lightning split the sky again, illuminating the valley in stark white light. But Marcus wasn't looking at the storm anymore. He was looking at his son and wondering if it was possible for a man like him to learn how to be a father. By morning, he would have to make the most important decision of his life. But for now, he was content to sit by the fire and watch over the child who had brought the storm inside with him. Marcus woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of someone moving around in his kitchen. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. Then he remembered the boy and sat up quickly in his chair, his neck stiff from sleeping upright. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and weak morning sunlight filtered through the windows. The couch was empty. Clean blankets were folded neatly at one end, and the broken glass from the night before had been swept up. Marcus could hear humming coming from the kitchen, a soft melody that made his chest tight with memory. Sarah used to hum that same song while she worked. He found Tommy standing on a chair at the stove, carefully turning eggs in a pan. The boy had put on clothes that Marcus recognized as his own from childhood, stored away in boxes he had never had the heart to throw out. They hung loose on Tommy's thin frame, but they were clean and dry. "Morning, Mr. Wellington," Tommy said cheerfully. "I hope it's okay I made breakfast. I found some eggs in your refrigerator and there was bread for toast." Marcus stared at the boy, amazed by the transformation. Last night, Tommy had been a broken, frightened child barely able to stand. This morning, he moved with quiet confidence, handling the spatula like he had been cooking his whole life. "You don't have to cook for me, son," Marcus said. "I know," Tommy replied, sliding the eggs onto 2 plates. "But you helped me when I needed it. Mama always said when someone's kind to you, you should be kind back." The mention of Sarah made Marcus's throat tight. He sat down at the kitchen table and watched Tommy butter the toast with careful precision. Everything the boy did was neat and organized, like he had learned early that being useful meant being wanted. "Tell me about your mother," Marcus said gently. Tommy's face lit up. She was the most beautiful lady in the whole world. She had hair like sunshine and eyes like the sky. She used to sing to me every night before bed, and she made the best pancakes you ever tasted. His smile faded slightly. "She got sick when I was 6. The doctors tried to help her, but she went to heaven anyway." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of loss settle over him. Sarah was gone. The woman who had been the love of his life, the mother of his child, had died while he was nursing his wounded pride and building his empire of loneliness. "She must have loved you very much," he said. "She did," Tommy's voice was certain. "Even when Bobby got mad and said mean things, she always protected me. She told me I was special, that I came from good people and shouldn't let anybody make me feel small." "What happened after she died?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Tommy's shoulders sagged. "Bobby changed. He started drinking more and getting angry about everything. Said I reminded him too much of Mama, that looking at me hurt too much. He tried to be good to me at first, I think, but he just couldn't do it anymore." The boy sat down across from Marcus, his breakfast barely touched. "The hitting started about a year ago. At first, it was just when he was really mad, and he always said sorry after. But then it got worse. Last week, he said he couldn't take care of me anymore, that I was costing too much money and causing too much trouble." Marcus felt rage building in his chest, hot and dangerous. The idea of anyone hurting this child, his child, made him want to drive to town and find Bobby Hensley. But he forced himself to stay calm. Tommy needed stability now, not more violence. "So he took you to a children's home?" Tommy nodded, his eyes fixed on his plate. "Riverside Children's Center. It's about 50 miles east of here. The people there weren't mean, but they weren't family either, just folks doing a job." He looked up at Marcus. "I heard one of them talking on the phone about how hard it is to place older kids, said most people want Bobbies, not boys my age with problems." "What problems?" Marcus asked. Tommy shrugged. "I don't talk much in new places, makes me nervous, and I have nightmares sometimes. The lady said I had behavioral issues because of trauma." He pronounced the big words carefully, like he had heard them many times but wasn't quite sure what they meant. Marcus wanted to tell the boy that he didn't have behavioral issues. He had survival skills. That quietness wasn't a problem, it was smart. That nightmares after what he had been through were normal, not something to be fixed or medicated away. Instead, he said, "How did you end up here? Riverside is 50 miles away." Tommy's cheeks turned red. "I ran away 3 days ago. I couldn't stay there anymore. It felt like being in jail, except I didn't do anything wrong." He traced patterns on the table with his finger. "I remembered Mama talking about the Wellington Ranch sometimes. She said it was the most beautiful place she ever worked, and that you were a good man even though people said you were mean." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. Sarah had remembered him kindly, even after everything, even after he had let his pride keep him from fighting for her. I walked mostly at night so nobody would see me, Tommy continued. Slept in barns and old buildings during the day. I was trying to get to town, maybe find work or something. But then the storm hit and I saw your lights. You walked 50 miles in 3 days. Marcus couldn't hide his amazement. Tommy nodded. Mama used to say I was tougher than I looked. Guess she was right. Marcus studied the boy's face, seeing Sarah's determination in the set of his jaw. Tommy had inherited more than just her eyes and her humming. He had her strength, her ability to endure whatever life threw at him. Tommy, Marcus said carefully, what did your mother tell you about your father? The boy's expression grew guarded. She said my real daddy was a good man who couldn't be with us, that it wasn't his fault, just the way things had to be. She made me promise never to go looking for him because it would only cause trouble for everybody. Marcus felt the weight of Sarah's sacrifice settle on his shoulders. She had known the truth would destroy them both, so she had chosen silence. She had raised their son alone, protecting Marcus from scandal and Tommy from a father who might not have been ready for the responsibility. But things were different now. Marcus was older, wiser, and wealthy enough that gossip couldn't touch him. More importantly, he was looking at a child who needed a home, and he was beginning to understand that he needed Tommy just as much. What if I told you, Marcus said slowly, that you might not have to go back to Riverside? Tommy's eyes went wide. What do you mean? I mean maybe you could stay here, with me, for as long as you wanted. The boy stared at him in disbelief. You'd want me to stay, even though I'm nothing but trouble. You're not trouble, Tommy. You're brave and smart and kind. Any man would be lucky to have you for a son. Tommy's eyes filled with tears. But why would you want me? You don't even know me. Marcus reached across the table and took the boy's small hand in his. It felt like holding a bird, all delicate bones and fragile trust. Because, he said, sometimes people come into our lives exactly when we need them most. You showed up on my doorstep in a storm, and maybe that wasn't just luck. Maybe it was meant to happen. Tommy squeezed his hand tightly. Do you really mean it? I could really stay. If you want to, but there's something I need to tell you first, something important about who you are and where you came from. Before Marcus could continue, the sound of vehicles approaching interrupted them. Through the kitchen window, he could see 3 black SUVs coming up the long driveway, kicking up clouds of dust in the morning air. Tommy went rigid with fear. They found me, he whispered. They're here to take me back. Marcus stood up, his protective instincts flaring to life. Nobody's taking you anywhere you don't want to go, I promise you that. The vehicles pulled up in front of the house, and several people got out. Marcus recognized the uniforms of social services workers, along with what looked like a sheriff's deputy. They were here on official business, and they clearly meant to leave with Tommy. Go upstairs, Marcus told the boy. Wait in my room and don't come down until I call for you. What if they make you give me back? Tommy's voice was small and scared. Marcus knelt down so they were eye level. Listen to me very carefully. I have a lot of money and a lot of lawyers. More than that, I have something they don't expect. What? Marcus smiled, and for the first time in years it felt completely real. The truth, and sometimes the truth is the most powerful weapon of all. Tommy hugged him quickly before running upstairs. Marcus watched him go, feeling something fierce and protective awakening in his chest. He had spent 25 years building walls to keep the world out. Now he was ready to tear them all down to protect one small boy who had brought him back to life. The doorbell rang, sharp and official. Marcus straightened his shoulders and walked to answer it. Outside waited a battle he was finally ready to fight. Inside waited a son he was finally ready to claim. Everything was about to change. Marcus opened the door to find 3 people standing on his porch. A woman in a crisp business suit holding a briefcase, a sheriff's deputy with his hand resting on his radio, and a younger man in casual clothes who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Mr. Wellington, the woman stepped forward. I'm Janet Morrison from Child Protective Services. This is Deputy Harris and Mr. James Hendricks from Riverside Children's Center. We have reason to believe you're harboring a runaway minor. Marcus kept his expression neutral, though his heart was pounding. Good morning, what can I do for you? We're looking for Tommy Hensley, Morrison continued. He disappeared from state custody 3 days ago. A truck driver reported seeing a young boy walking along Highway 287 yesterday morning, heading in this direction. This is a big ranch, Marcus said calmly. Lots of places for a boy to hide if he wanted to. Have you checked the outbuildings? Deputy Harris stepped forward. Mr. Wellington, if you're concealing a runaway child, that's a serious offense. Interfering with a custodial investigation can result in charges. Marcus almost smiled. These people thought they were dealing with some local rancher they could intimidate. They had no idea who they were up against. Deputy, I've been practicing law longer than you've been alive. If you want to search my property, you'll need a warrant. If you want to threaten me, you'll need better lawyers than the county can afford. Morrison held up her hand. Let's not make this adversarial. We're just concerned about Tommy's welfare. He's been through severe trauma and he needs professional care. This isn't about punishment. What kind of trauma? Marcus asked, though he already knew. Physical and emotional abuse from his guardian, Hendricks spoke up. Bobby Hensley signed away his parental rights last week. The boy has been in our care since then. Signed them away to who? To the state. Tommy's now a ward of Montana Social Services. We're working to find him a suitable foster placement. Marcus felt his anger building, but kept his voice level. Let me understand this. A man who spent years beating a child was allowed to simply sign a piece of paper and walk away from his responsibilities. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Hensley felt he couldn't provide adequate care. Sometimes voluntary relinquishment is in everyone's best interest. Whose best interest? Marcus asked. Bobby's, because he doesn't want to pay for a child he never wanted. The state's, because they get federal funding for every kid in the system. Or Tommy's, because being abandoned is supposed to help him somehow. Mr. Wellington, Morrison said firmly, a 9-year-old boy cannot make decisions about his own welfare. Children need structure, counseling, and supervised care, not charity from strangers. What if the stranger isn't really a stranger? The three visitors exchanged glances. Morrison frowned. What do you mean? Marcus made a decision that would change everything. I mean Tommy Hensley is my biological son, and I'm prepared to prove it. The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear birds singing in the trees. Morrison's briefcase slipped slightly in her grip. Deputy Harris's hand moved away from his radio. Hendricks just stared. That's impossible, Morrison said finally. Tommy's father is Robert Hensley. It's on his birth certificate. Birth certificates can be wrong, especially when a woman is protecting her child from scandal. Marcus stepped aside and gestured toward his living room. Would you like to come in and discuss this properly? The three officials filed into his house, looking around with barely concealed awe. The Wellington Ranch was legendary in Montana, and few people had ever seen the inside of the main house. Morrison took out a notepad and pen, all business despite her obvious surprise. Mr. Wellington, making false paternity claims is a serious matter. If you're trying to help Tommy by inventing a relationship that doesn't exist. I'm not inventing anything, Marcus interrupted. 26 years ago, Sarah Hensley worked for me as a housekeeper. We had a brief relationship. She left suddenly and married Bobby Hensley 6 months later. Tommy was born 9 months after Sarah and I were together. He walked to his desk and pulled out a file folder he had retrieved from his safe that morning. Here are copies of Sarah's employment records, showing she worked here from January to April 26 years ago. Here are bank records showing I paid her salary. And here's something else. Marcus opened the folder and pulled out a small photograph. It showed him and Sarah standing together outside the ranch house, her head on his shoulder, both of them smiling like they had found something precious. This was taken in March, 4 weeks before Sarah left. She was already pregnant, though neither of us knew it at the time. Morrison studied the photograph, then looked at the employment records. This proves you knew Tommy's mother. It doesn't prove paternity. No, but DNA testing will. I'm willing to take any test you require as many times as necessary. But while we're waiting for results, I want Tommy to stay here. Absolutely not, Morrison said quickly. Even if you are his biological father, you haven't been part of his life. You have no custodial rights and no experience with children, especially traumatized children. Neither does your foster system, apparently. How many homes has Tommy been through in the 3 years since his mother died? Hendricks answered reluctantly. He was with Bobby Hensley until last week. That's not what I asked. How many foster homes? Morrison and Hendricks exchanged looks. Finally, Morrison said, Tommy was placed in emergency foster care twice when Mr. Hensley was arrested for domestic disturbance. Both placements were temporary. How temporary? 3 days the first time, a week the second time. Both families requested his removal due to behavioral issues. Marcus felt his jaw clench. What behavioral issues? Nightmares, selective mutism, difficulty bonding with new caregivers. Classic signs of complex trauma. Or classic signs of a smart kid who knows the difference between people who care about him and people who are just doing a job. Before Morrison could respond, they heard footsteps on the stairs. Tommy appeared in the doorway, still wearing Marcus's oversized childhood clothes. His face was pale but determined. "Tommy," Marcus said gently, "I told you to wait upstairs." "I heard them talking about me," Tommy said quietly. "I wanted to see who they were." Morrison crouched down to Tommy's level, putting on the kind of fake smile adults used when they were trying too hard. "Hi, Tommy. I'm Janet Morrison. We've been very worried about you. Everyone at Riverside has been looking everywhere." Tommy didn't respond. He walked past Morrison and stood next to Marcus's chair. "Tommy," Morrison continued, "running away was very dangerous. You could have been hurt or worse. We need to take you back where you'll be safe." "I am safe," Tommy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Wellington took care of me." "I know he seems nice, sweetie, but you don't really know him. Riverside has trained professionals who understand children like you, children who have been through difficult experiences." Tommy looked up at Marcus with those impossibly blue eyes. "Are you really my daddy?" Marcus felt the eyes of all three officials on him. This was the moment of truth, literally. He could feel the weight of Tommy's hope, the skepticism of the social workers, and the magnitude of what he was about to claim. "Yes," he said simply, "I am." Tommy studied his face for a long moment, then nodded solemnly. "I thought maybe you have the same hands as me, and Mama always said I got my stubbornness from my real daddy." Morrison stood up, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. "Tommy, this man might think he's your father, but even if he is, that doesn't automatically make him qualified to care for you. There are procedures, evaluations, home studies." "How long do those take?" Marcus asked. "Months, maybe longer. In the meantime, Tommy needs to be an approved placement. And if the DNA test proves I'm his father, then we'll begin the process of evaluating you as a potential guardian. But that's a lengthy procedure. Background checks, psychological evaluations, parenting classes." "I'll do whatever it takes," Marcus said firmly. "But Tommy stays here while we sort this out." "That's not possible," Morrison said. "I have a court order requiring Tommy's immediate return to state custody." Marcus stood up, and suddenly the room felt smaller. When Marcus Wellington rose to his full height and set his jaw, smart people paid attention. "Ms. Morrison, Deputy Harris, Mr. Hendricks," he said quietly, "let me explain something to you. I have enough money to tie this case up in court for years. I have enough lawyers to make your lives very complicated. And I have enough political connections to make sure this story ends up on the front page of every newspaper in the state." He paused, letting that sink in. "But more than that, I have something you don't seem to understand. I have a son who needs me, and I need him. That little boy has been abandoned, abused, and shuffled around like a piece of unwanted furniture. He ran 50 miles through a storm to find something better. Well, he found it. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let you drag him away from the first safe place he's known in years." Marcus put his hand on Tommy's shoulder. The boy moved closer to him, unconsciously seeking protection. "So here's what's going to happen," Marcus continued. "You're going to leave. You're going to file whatever paperwork you need to file. And you're going to give me 48 hours to have my lawyers contact your superiors and work out a temporary arrangement. During that time, Tommy stays here." Morrison clutched her briefcase. "Mr. Wellington, I can't just—" "Yes, you can. Because if you try to take him now, I'll have an injunction filed within the hour. And while we're fighting in court, Tommy will still be here, but you'll be explaining to your supervisor why you chose confrontation over cooperation with a man who wants to do the right thing." Deputy Harris stepped forward. "Sir, a court order is a court order." Marcus smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. "Deputy, that court order was issued before anyone knew Tommy had a biological father willing and able to care for him. It's about to become very complicated legally. Are you prepared to remove a child from his father's home based on paperwork that may no longer be valid? Harris looked uncomfortable. Morrison was clearly weighing her options. Hendricks just looked tired. Finally, Morrison spoke. 48 hours, but if your lawyers can't work something out, we're coming back with additional officers if necessary. Understood, Marcus said. Thank you for being reasonable. The three officials left, and Marcus watched their vehicles disappear down his driveway. Tommy was still pressed against his side, trembling slightly. Are they going to take me away? Tommy asked. Marcus knelt down and put both hands on the boy's shoulders. Not if I can help it. But Tommy, there's something else I need to tell you, something about your mother and me. Tommy nodded, waiting. I loved your mother very much. She was the most important person in my life. But she was married to another man when we met, and I was afraid of what people would say if they knew about us. When she left to protect us both from gossip, I let her go instead of fighting for her. I've regretted that every day since. Tommy's eyes filled with understanding beyond his years. She protected me too. She told Bobby I was his so you wouldn't get in trouble. That's right, she was protecting all of us. But now she's gone, and Bobby has given up his rights, and you need someone who will never give up on you. I may not know much about being a father, but I'm willing to learn if you'll teach me. Tommy threw his arms around Marcus's neck and held on tight. I want to stay with you. I want to stay here forever. Marcus held his son and felt 25 years of loneliness finally coming to an end. But he also knew the fight was just beginning. The state wouldn't give up easily, and there would be questions, investigations, and legal battles ahead. But for the first time in decades, Marcus Wellington had something worth fighting for. The next 36 hours passed like a whirlwind. Marcus's phone rang constantly as his team of lawyers worked to untangle the legal mess surrounding Tommy's custody. Meanwhile, Marcus tried to give the boy a sense of what life could be like if they were allowed to stay together. He showed Tommy around the ranch, watching the boy's eyes light up at the sight of horses grazing in endless pastures. Tommy had never been on a horse before, but he approached the gentle mare Marcus chose with the same quiet confidence he showed in everything else. Within an hour, he was riding like he had been born in the saddle. Mama would have loved this, Tommy said as they walked the horses back to the barn. She always talked about how peaceful it was here. Marcus felt the familiar ache of loss whenever Tommy mentioned Sarah. She used to ride this same horse. Lady here was just a filly then, but your mother had a way with animals. They trusted her immediately. Is that why you hired her? Because she was good with horses? Marcus considered how to answer. Tommy deserved honesty, but he was still just a boy. I hired her because she needed work and I needed help, but I kept her around because she made this place feel like a home instead of just a house. They spent the evening in Marcus's study. Tommy curled up in an oversized leather chair with a book while Marcus handled phone calls from lawyers, judges, and social workers. Every few minutes, Marcus would glance over to make sure the boy was still there, still safe, still real. Around 9 o'clock, Tommy fell asleep with the book open on his chest. Marcus carried him upstairs to the guest bedroom he had hastily converted into a child's room. As he tucked Tommy in, the boy's eyes fluttered open. Marcus, Tommy's voice was sleepy and young. What happens if they make me go back? Marcus sat on the edge of the bed. Then I'll fight until I find a way to bring you home again. What if you can't? The question cut deep, because Marcus had been wondering the same thing. He had money and influence, but the state had bureaucracy and procedure on their side. Sometimes the system protected children. Sometimes it destroyed families. Tommy, do you remember when you walked 50 miles to find something better? The boy nodded. You didn't give up even when it was hard, even when you were scared. You kept going because you believed something good was waiting at the end. Well, I'm at the beginning of my own long walk now, and I'm not going to give up either. Tommy smiled and closed his eyes. Within minutes, he was breathing deeply, finally secure enough to let sleep take him completely. Marcus went back downstairs and poured himself a whiskey. His lead attorney, David Chen, had called an hour ago with an update. The DNA test had been expedited and would have results by morning. Meanwhile, Chen had filed an emergency motion claiming that removing Tommy from his biological father's care would constitute additional trauma to an already vulnerable child. The state was pushing back hard. They argued that Marcus had no established relationship with Tommy, no experience with children, and no understanding of trauma care. They wanted Tommy returned to Riverside immediately pending a full investigation. Marcus understood their position, even if he disagreed with it. From the outside, it probably looked like a wealthy man trying to buy his way into instant fatherhood. They couldn't see what he saw when he looked at Tommy. Sarah's eyes, her stubborn chin, her gentle spirit combined with quiet strength. His phone rang. David Chen's name appeared on the screen. Marcus, we have the DNA results. 99.7% probability of paternity. You're officially Tommy's biological father. Marcus felt relief wash over him, followed immediately by a new wave of worry. What happens now? Judge Morrison, no relation to the social worker, has agreed to an emergency hearing tomorrow morning at 10. The state is arguing that biological paternity alone isn't sufficient grounds for immediate custody, especially given the circumstances. What circumstances? They're going to argue that you've had no previous contact with Tommy, that you're not prepared to handle a traumatized child, and that the sudden disruption of his placement could be harmful. They'll want a full home study, psychological evaluation, and gradual transition period. Marcus rubbed his temples. How long could that take? Months, maybe longer if they find anything they don't like. And Tommy goes back to the children's home while they investigate me. That's what they're pushing for. But Marcus, we have some ammunition too. Tommy's own testimony about wanting to stay with you carries weight. The fact that he sought you out, that he's thriving in your care, those things matter. What are our chances? Chen paused. Honestly, 50-50. Judge Morrison is fair, but she's conservative when it comes to child welfare. She won't take risks with a kid's safety. After hanging up, Marcus walked through his quiet house, thinking about everything that had brought him to this moment. 25 years ago, he had been too proud and too scared to fight for Sarah. He had let societal expectations and his own cowardice cost him the only woman he had ever loved. He wouldn't make that mistake twice. The next morning, Marcus woke to find Tommy already up and dressed, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of orange juice and a piece of toast. The boy looked nervous but determined. "Are we going to court today?" Tommy asked. "Yes, are you ready for that?" Tommy nodded. "Will they ask me questions?" "Probably, just tell the truth. Tell them how you feel and what you want." "I want to stay with you. Is it okay to say that?" Marcus sat down across from him. "It's more than okay. It's the most important thing you can say." They arrived at the courthouse an hour early. Marcus had dressed in his best suit, and Tommy wore new clothes they had bought the day before, a button-down shirt and slacks that actually fit him. David Chen met them at the entrance with his team of associates. "Remember," Chen said quietly as they walked to the courtroom, "this is just a preliminary hearing. Even if we don't get full custody today, we can establish a foundation for future proceedings." The courtroom was smaller than Marcus had expected, with fluorescent lights and worn carpet that had seen thousands of family dramas play out. Janet Morrison sat at a table with the state's attorney, a stern-looking woman in her 50s. Behind them sat James Hendricks from Riverside and several other officials Marcus didn't recognize. Judge Morrison entered, and everyone rose. She was younger than Marcus had expected, probably in her early 40s, with graying hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Be seated," she said briskly. "This is an emergency hearing regarding the custody of Thomas Robert Hensley, age 8. I've reviewed the initial filings from both parties. Mr. Chen, your client is claiming biological paternity." "Yes, Your Honor. DNA test results confirm that Mr. Wellington is Tommy's biological father with 99.7% certainty." Judge Morrison nodded, and the state's position. The state's attorney stood. "Your Honor, while we don't dispute the DNA results, we maintain that biological paternity alone is insufficient grounds for immediate custody. Mr. Wellington has had no previous relationship with this child. He has no experience with children, particularly those who have suffered severe trauma. Removing Tommy from professional care at this time could cause additional psychological damage." "Mr. Chen, how do you respond?" "Your Honor, Tommy sought out my client on his own. He ran away from state custody and walked 50 miles to reach him. That suggests an instinctive recognition of family connection. Moreover, in the 3 days Tommy has been with Mr. Wellington, he has shown marked improvement in behavior and emotional stability." Judge Morrison looked at the papers in front of her. I see that Tommy was placed in emergency foster care twice in the past 2 years due to domestic violence in his previous home. How did those placements go? Janet Morrison stood. Both placements ended early due to behavioral issues. Tommy has difficulty adjusting to new environments and caregivers. Yet he seems to have adjusted to Mr. Wellington's home quickly, the judge observed. Why do you think that is? Possibly because Mr. Wellington represents a fantasy figure, the wealthy benefactor who can solve all his problems. Children often idealize adults who rescue them from difficult situations. Judge Morrison turned to David Chen. Mr. Chen, what safeguards are in place to ensure Tommy's well-being if he remains with your client? Mr. Wellington is prepared to hire qualified child care professionals, arrange for counseling, and submit to any monitoring the court deems appropriate. He has unlimited resources to provide for Tommy's needs. Money isn't everything, counselor. What about emotional support, experience with childhood trauma? Marcus felt his lawyer hesitate, and he made a quick decision. He stood up. Your Honor, may I speak? Judge Morrison looked surprised. Mr. Wellington, it's highly unusual for a party to address the court directly in a custody hearing. I understand, Your Honor, but this isn't really about legal procedures. This is about a boy who needs someone to fight for him the way no one ever has before. The judge studied his face for a long moment. You may proceed, but keep it brief. Marcus took a deep breath. Your Honor, I'm 62 years old. I've never been married, never had children, never even had a dog. By every measure the state is using, I'm completely unqualified to raise a traumatized child. He saw Janet Morrison nod in agreement. But 3 days ago, that boy walked 50 miles through a storm because he was looking for something better than what he had. He could have stopped at any house along the way, could have asked anyone for help. Instead, he came to me. Not because he knew I was his father. He had no idea. But because he was following some instinct that told him this was where he belonged. Marcus looked at Tommy, who was sitting in the front row with a court-appointed advocate. I can't promise I'll be a perfect father. I can't promise I won't make mistakes. But I can promise that I will never abandon him, never hurt him, and never stop fighting for him. That boy has been failed by every adult in his life except his mother. I won't be another name on that list. Judge Morrison was quiet for a moment. Mr. Wellington, what makes you think you can succeed where trained foster families have failed? Because I'm not doing this out of duty or charity, Your Honor. I'm doing this out of love. Tommy is my son. That may be new information to this court, but it's been true for 8 years. I just didn't know it. The judge turned to Tommy's advocate. Has the child expressed his preferences? Yes, Your Honor. Tommy has consistently stated that he wants to remain with Mr. Wellington. He shows no anxiety about the arrangement and has demonstrated normal, age-appropriate behavior while in his care. Judge Morrison stood and walked to where Tommy was sitting. Tommy, do you understand what's happening here today? Tommy nodded solemnly. You're deciding if I can stay with Marcus or if I have to go back. That's right. Is there anything you want to tell me about that? Tommy glanced at Marcus, then back at the judge. Marcus is my daddy. I know he is even without the test. And he wants me, really wants me, not just because he has to. How do you know that? Because when I told him I was trouble, he said any man would be lucky to have me for a son. Nobody ever said anything like that to me before. Judge Morrison returned to her bench and was quiet for several minutes, reviewing papers and obviously weighing the decision. Finally, she looked up. This is a complex situation with no perfect answers. The state has legitimate concerns about Mr. Wellington's lack of experience with children. However, the biological relationship is significant, and Tommy's own expressed wishes carry considerable weight. Marcus held his breath. I'm going to approve a temporary custody arrangement with strict conditions. Mr. Wellington will have physical custody of Tommy for 30 days while a full home study is conducted. During this time, Tommy will receive weekly counseling sessions with a trauma specialist, and Mr. Wellington will attend parenting classes focused on children who have experienced abuse. Relief flooded through Marcus, followed immediately by determination. 30 days wasn't long enough, but it was a start. Additionally, the judge continued, a social worker will conduct unannounced visits twice weekly to assess the home environment and Tommy's adjustment. If there are any concerns about his welfare, custody will revert to the state immediately. She looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Wellington, you have an enormous responsibility. This child has been through more trauma than most adults experience in a lifetime. Are you prepared for that? Marcus stood. Yes, Your Honor, I am. Then court is adjourned. Good luck to both of you. As people filed out of the courtroom, Tommy ran to Marcus and hugged him tightly. We won, he asked. We got a chance, Marcus replied. Now we have to prove we deserve it. Outside the courthouse, Janet Morrison approached them. Mr. Wellington, I hope you understand that we'll be watching very carefully if Tommy shows any signs of regression or distress. He won't, Marcus said firmly, because he's finally where he belongs. As they drove home to the ranch, Tommy was quiet, processing everything that had happened. Finally, he spoke. Marcus, what if I mess up? What if I'm too much trouble and you change your mind about wanting me? Marcus pulled the truck over and turned to face his son. Tommy, listen to me very carefully. You are not too much trouble. You are not a burden. You are my son, and nothing you could do would ever make me stop wanting you. Do you understand? Tommy nodded, tears in his eyes. Good, now let's go home and start learning how to be a family. 3 weeks into their 30-day trial period, Marcus discovered that being a father was nothing like running a business empire. Children didn't respond to boardroom tactics, quarterly goals, or profit projections. They required something much more difficult: patience, understanding, and the ability to love someone even when they pushed every boundary you had. Tommy tested those boundaries daily. The first week had been honeymoon perfect. Tommy was polite, helpful, and eager to please. He made his bed without being asked, cleaned up after himself, and never complained about anything. Marcus began to think that maybe parenting wouldn't be as hard as everyone claimed. Then Tommy felt safe enough to start acting like a real child instead of a grateful guest. It started with small things. He forgot to put his dishes in the dishwasher. He left toys scattered around the living room. He talked back when Marcus asked him to turn off the television. Normal kid behavior that Marcus had no experience handling. The real test came on a Tuesday morning when Tommy announced he didn't want to go to his counseling appointment. I don't like talking to Dr. Walsh, Tommy said, crossing his arms stubbornly. She asks too many questions about things I don't want to remember. Marcus had been getting dressed for a meeting with potential investors. He had 15 minutes to get Tommy to his appointment and then drive across town to close a deal worth millions. The old Marcus would have simply commanded obedience and expected compliance. Instead, he sat on Tommy's bed and really looked at his son. The boy's face was pale and his hands were shaking slightly. This wasn't ordinary defiance. This was fear. What kind of questions does she ask? Marcus said gently. About Bobby, about the hitting, about the nights when Mama was in the hospital and I had to take care of myself. Tommy's voice got smaller. I don't want to think about that stuff anymore. Why can't we just forget it happened? Marcus felt his heart break a little. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to his assistant, canceling the investor meeting. The deal could wait. His son couldn't. Tommy, do you know why buildings have foundation inspections? The boy shook his head, confused by the change of subject. When I build something important, I have to check the foundation first. Look for cracks, weak spots, places that might cause problems later. If I ignore those problems and just build over them, the whole structure could collapse someday. Tommy was listening now, his defiance replaced by curiosity. Talking to Dr. Walsh is like inspecting your foundation. The bad things that happen to you left cracks. If we don't examine them and fix them, they might cause bigger problems later. It's not fun, and it's not easy, but it's necessary. Tommy considered this. What if the cracks are too big to fix? Then we find ways to work around them, make them part of the structure instead of weaknesses. Some of the strongest buildings in the world were built on damaged foundations that were repaired properly. After a long moment, Tommy nodded. Okay, but will you come with me today, just to sit in the waiting room? Of course. Marcus called his assistant again and cleared his entire morning. The investors would have to reschedule. For the first time in his adult life, something was more important than business. Dr. Walsh was a small woman with kind eyes and infinite patience. After Tommy's session, she asked to speak with Marcus privately. He's making remarkable progress, she said. The fact that he felt comfortable enough to refuse to come today is actually a positive sign. It means he trusts you enough to show negative emotions. I'm not sure I understand. Traumatized children often become hypervigilant about pleasing adults. They learn that compliance equals safety. When Tommy started testing boundaries with you, it meant he finally believed you wouldn't abandon him for being imperfect. Marcus thought about this as they drove home. Tommy was quiet in the passenger seat, emotionally drained from his session but looking relieved. Tommy, Marcus said, Dr. Walsh says you're doing really well in counseling. It still sucks, Tommy replied bluntly. Marcus laughed. Yeah, I imagine it does, but you're brave for doing it anyway. Marcus, are you disappointed that I'm not perfect? Like that I get scared and stubborn and stuff? Marcus pulled into their driveway and turned off the engine. Tommy, if you were perfect, I'd worry that you were just pretending to be someone you're not. I don't want a perfect son. I want a real son. And real people have feelings and fears and bad days. That afternoon, Marcus got a call from Janet Morrison. Her weekly check-in had become routine, but this time her tone was different. Mr. Wellington, I've been reviewing Dr. Walsh's reports and the notes from our home visits. I have to admit, I'm impressed with Tommy's progress. Thank you, he's working hard. So are you. The parenting classes, the counseling sessions you attend with him, the way you've restructured your work schedule. It shows real commitment. Marcus looked out the window to where Tommy was teaching one of the ranch dogs to fetch. The boy's laughter carried across the yard, a sound that still amazed Marcus with its pure joy. Ms. Morrison, Tommy isn't a project or a responsibility. He's my son. This is what fathers do. Not all of them, she said quietly. Mr. Wellington, I'm recommending that the judge grant you permanent custody. Assuming the final home study goes well, you should have an answer within the week. Marcus felt something inside his chest finally relax, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying for 3 weeks. The final home study was conducted by a different social worker, a thorough woman who spent 4 hours interviewing Tommy, observing their interactions, and touring every inch of the house. She asked Tommy dozens of questions when Marcus wasn't around, giving the boy every opportunity to express doubts or concerns. When she was finished, she sat with Marcus in his study. Mr. Wellington, when this case first crossed my desk, I was skeptical. A wealthy bachelor suddenly claiming a damaged child. It had all the hallmarks of either savior complex or guilt-driven charity. Marcus waited, trying to read her expression. But watching you two together, it's clear this is neither of those things. You become a father in the truest sense. And Tommy has become your son. The transformation in both of you is remarkable. 3 days later, Marcus and Tommy sat in the same courtroom where their journey had officially begun. Judge Morrison looked over the final reports with the same careful attention she had shown throughout the process. Mr. Wellington, the unanimous recommendation from all parties is that you be granted full legal custody of Thomas Wellington. Marcus blinked. Wellington. Tommy has requested a legal name change to reflect his biological parentage. Do you have any objection? Marcus looked at his son, who was grinning broadly. No objection at all, Your Honor. Then it's my pleasure to grant full custody to Marcus Wellington of his son, Thomas Wellington. Court is adjourned. Tommy threw his arms around Marcus's neck as soon as the judge's gavel fell. We did it. We're really a family now. Marcus held his son tightly, thinking about all the twists and turns that had brought them to this moment. Sarah's sacrifice, Tommy's courage, his own willingness to finally fight for something that mattered more than money or pride. That evening, they sat together on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the valley. Tommy was curled up against Marcus's side, reading a book about horses. It had become their daily ritual, this quiet time together as the day ended. Marcus, Tommy said without looking up from his book. Yeah, son. Do you think Mama knows about us being together? Marcus thought about Sarah, about the love they had shared and the son they had created, about her wisdom in protecting Tommy until he was old enough to find his way home. I think she knows, Marcus said softly, and I think she's proud of how brave and strong you are. Tommy smiled and went back to his book. Marcus watched the stars emerge in the darkening sky and marveled at how completely his life had changed. 3 weeks ago, he had been a lonely old man with more money than purpose. Now he was a father to a boy who had taught him that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought or sold. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. 3 different business emergencies needed his immediate attention. Marcus glanced at the messages, then turned the phone off without responding. The emergencies would have to wait. Right now, he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. He was being a father to his son, and everything else was just details. As Tommy fell asleep against his shoulder under the Montana stars, Marcus made a silent promise to Sarah, wherever she was. He would love their son enough for both of them. He would protect him, guide him, and never let him doubt his worth again. The child who had whimpered at his door, broken and afraid, had become a boy who laughed and dreamed and trusted completely in his father's love. And the millionaire rancher who had revealed his greatest secret had discovered something worth more than all his wealth combined. He had found his family, and for the first time in 25 years, Marcus Wellington was completely, genuinely happy. The storm that had brought Tommy to his door had passed, but it had left behind something precious: a second chance at love, a son to cherish, and a future bright with possibility. Marcus looked up at the stars and whispered a thank you to the woman who had made it all possible, even in her absence. Sarah's greatest gift wasn't the love they had shared, though that had been precious beyond measure. Her greatest gift was the son who carried her spirit and his stubborn determination, who had walked 50 miles through a storm to find his way home. And now, finally, they were both exactly where they belonged,